All right, we hit record, I think. Yes, we're recording. Excellent. This is, I'm sorry that this kind of snuck up on people. I would like to point out that I have created a calendar, and if you add that to your Google Calendar, if you use Google Calendar, that will give you an alert if you go by the Google ecosystem. Open to suggestions if there's some other format like an iCal or something like that. There used to be a thing in Confluence that had you created a calendar thing, like a calendar widget, but for whatever reason, it's been taken out of the ASF Confluence. So we can't do calendar widgets inside of CWiki. So I just created a link. There's two things in there. There's this meeting, which has multiple months run out, and also the reoccurring Kubernetes meeting that's in there. So if you add that one calendar, you get all those for free.
Can you maybe send an ICS out to dev?
An ICS? Yeah, I could. I should have just asked you first. Of course. Let me try that. Yeah, I could do that. All righty. Forgot to start my notes. The first thing that was on the agenda for today was just an update on what's happening with Kubernetes, the Kubernetes meeting. And we have, well, actually, I'm sorry, I reversed it. I have an update on testing a Kubernetes operator, but Mick wanted to do the update on testing, and he's not here. So maybe if somebody could ping him real quick.
Yeah, I'll ping him. Isn't it like 1 in the morning?
Yeah, it's a little late there or something.
Okay, well, he did.
Like Norway, I think.
Yes, it is. It is exactly.
But
that's correct.
He was texting me soon on Slack, so maybe he's still on. Let me check. Like just before this meeting, he was.
Well,
yeah,
he posted an update in dev.
Yeah, it's 9 p.m. there. He should be around.
Okay. It's probably running or something. Guy's a maniac.
Yeah, and Patrick, one more thing that I wanted to mention in that context is that we're looking to hook up some tests to Fallout, which is we open sourced it a few weeks ago. It's the distributed testing suite. It's good for more performance and operational type testing. And so I posted some tickets in Slack that we were looking to get started with, but was looking for feedback if anybody had other places to start, other places that we should jump in and help out. Really any feedback there for where we should focus our attention for the testing scope. Crickets. And yeah, Jordan, I'll also mention that I saw all your pings in Slack on some of the tickets. And I think that are in Jira on some of the tickets. And that would be really helpful if we could track down some of that feedback, just so we don't duplicate any effort from anybody else there.
Yeah, I think one of the first steps is just sort of like enumerating. I mean, we can't be, we might find other stuff, but at least starting to enumerate what we want to test, and in some sort of priority, like, storage engine stuff more important than, I don't know, some feature nobody uses kind of stuff, so that we can make decisions about where to put that effort.
And are there any plans to have so outside of the D tests and the unit tests, but are there any plans to have a performance or operational suite run before like an RC is cut or something like that?
I think we absolutely want performance covered. For a while, that was kind of being handled by Netflix. Like with the messaging service, they were offering like their suite of tools and their sort of resources to run a lot of performance benchmarks. So we can catch up with them, but I mean, I think absolutely we need to figure out the performance coverage also. To directly answer your question, no, there isn't a plan right now. We should make one.
So I had developed the tools that now are in the DataStax portfolio for TLP stress and cluster, and in there were things like Grafana dashboards. TLP stress had the workloads out of the box, and TLP cluster could fire up arbitrary size clusters in Amazon. It's not perfect. There's definitely a whole bunch of bugs, but there might be some bits and pieces out of there that can be used at some point for folks. I know that there's like a lot of other tooling that people already have, but it's a resource to pick things out of.
Yeah, Alex and I have been fixing bugs in TLP cluster, like the install and whatnot. So, yeah, so there's definitely an effort to improve that if people want to use it.
Okay, sweet. And yeah, what we were thinking is that we'd have part of the report is like, okay, what did this test run? What were the metrics maybe shown by a Grafana dashboard or something like that? And then kind of a summary of each thing that was run through that we could post back to Jira or something like that just to keep track of what was run. But we'll definitely check out those other options too for the tooling.
All right, so I don't think we're going to get Mick, but he did post some stuff in Dev.
Yeah, he said it's family time over there, so he's not joining.
All right, fair enough.
Oh,
Yeah, boundaries. What are that? Okay, so I'm gonna just put what he put in the dev list in this doc. But there, he had a series of Jiras that I think are these the Jiras that you were talking about? Oh, Chris, this is you. What am I doing here? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to copy and paste those in.
Yeah. Sorry. Mick had a different one. All right, cool. Is there anything else on this?
No, we'll just continue to circle back in Jira and on Slack if we have questions as we start moving forward with some of this stuff.
Okay. All right. The other thing that I had on here was the Kubernetes stuff. The Kubernetes meetings that we had went reasonably well. We had good attendance on both. There was some feedback on the dev list from Frank about having one meeting instead of two. Now, the initial reason for having two is just to be a little more friendly about 24 time zones. I could certainly understand the reasoning behind having one instead of having to repeat ourselves. But I'm gonna, I mean, we could debate it here or some, but I'm gonna reply on the dev list and see what the consensus could be on that. We know who the players are. Most of them are in Europe and in North America. So those are the people that attended the meetings up to this point. But open for discussion right now. Anybody have any strong feelings on this?
I can't speak for everybody, but I think that those of us that don't have any real Kubernetes like experience, I have a feeling we're going to end up sort of just not really engaged. It seems like there really are two meetings. It's like you're either running Cassandra or you're helping build it. And obviously there's some folks that do both.
Well, there's two Kubernetes meetings, John. That's what I was talking about. There's one in late at night on West Coast time and early morning West Coast time so that we can get this APAC and European coverage going. So two Kubernetes meetings and on top of this one. So that was what he was talking about. It's like, how about one Kubernetes meeting? And yeah.
Well, it seems to me most of us are US based. And if someone in Europe is saying we don't need the Europe meeting, then that seems clear.
Well, we talked about this time, like for this meeting, this time is kind of in the weird middle. You know, it overlaps a lot of time zones, and it rotates, and I rotate these every meeting time so that we have the pane shifts from one place to the other, and it's like a round robin pane. So I mean, I would be okay doing that. I guess I'll just take it to the dev list, but I was hoping we'd get a few people on here that attend those meetings for some feedback. But all right, no problem. The other thing worth mentioning is what some of the outcome on that was. We are working on CEP2. Ben and I worked on it some yesterday. So Ben Bromhead and I are kind of heading up this initial documentation effort. This was part of those meetings was, all right, let's get it all written out. We'll have it all wrapped up for the Kubernetes meeting this week, and start hopefully working on a group doc that outlines a lot of the initial expectations. I think it's going to kind of shape around the levels that are being specified by the Kubernetes operator project. There's like level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And level 3 goes up to full lifecycle management. And then once you get beyond that, you're in a different place. But if that's where most people are at. Like, we need to get to level 3 on operator compliance at this point. That makes full lifecycle management of a Cassandra cluster possible.
So to John's point, if there's a pretty large divide between Cassandra database developers and then Kubernetes operator developers, and we have some that have a foot in both, well, we have a lot of people that have a foot in both camps, but that does run the risk of becoming a de facto deployment approach to things, because a boatload of people are migrating into Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably worth just at least having in our radar of some kind of, whether it's documentation or on-ramp or something where it's like, okay, contributing to Cassandra also involves ramping up on the basics of the Kubernetes ecosystem and understanding the operator as well. Just kind of throwing that out there. Like, instead of just documentation for operators, also documentation for developers, targeting Cassandra developers that don't necessarily know Kubernetes that well.
Yes, please.
All right, so what's the specific request? Document the shit out of it?
No, like, so normally you'd say, okay, I'm going to write some documentation for a user. Who's that user going to be? What's the person I'm writing this for? You write it for a person that's going to be running Cassandra using Kubernetes. But there's another user here, right? Just like if you go to the documentation for getting started as a developer on Cassandra, that's very specific documentation saying, like, here's how you clone it, here's how you run CI, here's how you actually work as a developer on Cassandra. Targeting that same persona and saying, and here's how you, as a Cassandra developer, also work on the operator. Here's how you understand the basics of Kubernetes. Here's how you understand how it sockets into the operator for Cassandra would be useful. That's the specific ask.
So for instance, I know a couple things about Cassandra, but I don't know a whole lot about Kubernetes.
That was definitely surfaced in those meetings, as we have a lot of Kubernetes expertise showing up. Here's like where some of the weighting is. We have a lot of people who run Kubernetes for company X, so that's a scale problem and they're experts in running Kubernetes. They're approaching Cassandra as yet another thing that they have to support. What can we do to help that effort? This is the scratch they're trying to itch, which is cool, because that's a cool scratch, right? They're like, this is difficult. What can we do to help make this easier? So they don't know a lot about Cassandra other than they can set it up, run repair, that kind of stuff. They know the basics. And so we have a really interesting headwind of people showing up that are not Cassandra experts.
I think the concrete example, though, regardless of expertise, is like, it should be documented somewhere how you build a non-official release of the Kubernetes operator so that you work on it, just like there's documentation of how you build like a non-official local Cassandra so you can work on it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's lower on the priority list than user documentation. I just agree it should exist.
I think the last thing we want is for the Kubernetes operator to become like this thing that exists somewhere else, where Cassandra developers that get on the project look at it askance and are like, it's a pain in the ass to learn. I'm really busy. I don't want to understand that part. Like, it'd be much better for us, I think, holistically, if that was like a part of the ecosystem, if that was considered like table stakes for working on Cassandra. It's also understanding and working on that if you need to or choose to.
Totally agree.
And in likelihood, a lot of that's going to be expressed in places like Helm.
Yeah, to
Okay.
be honest, I don't think it's really woe into the pipeline to do it, because I can tell you at the beginning when I started at the end of last year, we had a lot of to-do sections in the Cassandra documentation, and I was asking for some stuff around, and people were like, some people were from community and other developers, they were like, oh, I don't know, I use this or that sometimes, but it was like blurry and I never managed to make it work or whatever, and we didn't have documentation from all the stuff or checking different forums and stuff, so it shouldn't be. We definitely should take care of it like a higher priority, not low. This is my vision from what I saw before, and now when we don't have all those to-dos, people are way more happy and way more going there, checking and doing a lot of stuff. That's at least my observation. Just sharing. Hope it's worth it.
That's good feedback. Yeah, and then I want to also combine a couple of topics. It seems like there's a directionality with the testing that's happening in Cassandra and running it on Kubernetes and Docker, creating images, tons of like whatever base image. We had this is another hot topic inside of this is there's no official Docker image for Cassandra other than what's been created by the Docker people. And it's kind of out of bounds of the ASF's rules. They like, you can't do that. So there's a little bit of a crisis there. Like, how can we do that?
Isn't there an Apache Docker like account though?
No, that did not.
Seems very.
Yeah, Nate brought up some points about like how it violates the license to have a non-release as an official image, and so like there's details. I should probably stop talking.
I mean, the PMC could just vote on an official Docker image release, right? And that could just be part of our release process. Is that ignorant of me to say?
Well, I mean, it's open source. If someone wants to just violate the rules, the ESF, like, go ahead.
That's like the most classic Brandon thing I've
heard in
a while. Just
doing this would actually be remarkably easy if we have to change a few things, but creating and publishing a Docker image is actually not that hard if the build system is set up a little bit differently than how we have it right now. We did it with the TLP stress, and it was only like adding 6 lines of configuration to the build.gradle. It just did it for us.
I mean, we can bring it to the PMC to see if there's appetite for it. Like, I don't think it'd be a lot of extra cognitive burden on people in terms of being part of a release process. And it does make sense to have an official Docker image, I think.
Well, it's pretty easy to put. Oh, sorry, Patrick. It's pretty easy to put together. You can just throw the Docker file in the project and just have it run when you do a release somehow, just automatically. It's fairly straightforward to generate an image.
Yeah, I was just looking, and specifically it's around, it has to be an official, first and foremost, it has to be an official release blessed by the PMC. You can't
do that as like part of our release process and just update it whenever we release.
Well, you couldn't have like a nightly build Docker image.
We also don't do nightly releases.
Yeah.
If we wanted to do some sort of nightly thing, we could put it elsewhere. Like, it's not like setting up a Docker hub type thing is like outrageous. And Amazon even offers it as a service. So
I mean, technically, you can grab it off Jenkins.
Yeah.
What do
because it can be like, it's easy to build it as just a tarball. That's fairly straightforward. So honestly, I think it should be, while there might be some benefit to the snapshots, it's also, I think if the primary goal is make it so easy that it's just like typing in exactly one command into the build system that generates that Docker image, then it's like, we don't really need to worry about infrastructure. And we kind of need to do that anyway. Like right now, it's like building your own deb package, right? Unfortunately, nobody knows how to do that, but in theory, it's something that you should be able to do very trivially. And it is, if you know the mystical, magical commands to make it work.
Kill a chicken.
We put images of Tinkerpop out on Docker Hub on releases. So when we have a standard vote release, we publish direct to Docker Hub. It's just a Maven command and just sent it up there. I don't know what Apache's issue with. I know there's a lot of things they don't like. They might not like Docker Hub. They might not like PyPy and all those other places that you can publish stuff to, but typically if it's done as part of a release, like at least my interaction with them has been, if you do it as part of a release, it's an official thing, and you make it clear that what you've put out there as a binary is in fact for convenience purposes. They don't seem to have a huge problem with it. At least that's been kind of my dealings with them on that. So that kind of gets around issues with, quote unquote, releasing something that isn't source code. So that's kind of been what we've done with them for a really long time. I think a lot of other projects do it too. I didn't realize that the Cassandra Docker images that were out there already that I've been playing with weren't actually, they were done by Docker itself. So I didn't realize that. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What are they going to do anyway? Bark? There's no bite.
Well, apparently Tinkerpop, nothing. Yeah, I think there's this like some consternation by a lot of folks in the Kubernetes community. They're like, why isn't there an official Cassandra Docker image? And, it's like from the project, it's like I have to go to a Docker Hub. And so there's already a little side eye, like, is that just some enthusiast putting it together? And is that the right version or what have you? Yeah, this might be something a little more PMC oriented. Like, hey, how does the PMC want to do this? Like,
I'll take it.
Okay, yeah, because I think it would, from a community standpoint, it's just and having a tarball is great, but Docker image is kind of how people work now.
Yeah, just on Steven's questions, how do other Apache projects do it? Do we have an example of another Apache project releasing a Docker image?
I was just looking.
Well, Tinkerpop.
Yeah, some of them. I think some of them release on. There has been a move to like get all these third-party, like place where you dump binaries, right? To get it all under an official like Apache account, and I just kind of keep ignoring that. Like I don't see those emails because we kind of have it set up nicely and everything. I don't want them like taking over like that part of stuff. I don't want to move stuff. So I don't know. Cassandra, we'll probably start talking about this in Cassandra, and it'll end up like blowing up everybody in Apache. But this project seems to get watched.
Sorry, man.
So,
Yeah. Oops.
I should have been quiet. I shouldn't have said anything. But yeah, I think for the most part they are looking at pulling it into like Apache owned or not like a official Apache organization.
Like an artifactory type thing where it's just all encompassing.
So, but I'm like, dude, I'll take forever. So I just say, just go ahead and just publish it. You can tell them I did it. You copied Tinkerpop.
So this is a good time to remind everyone, this is a public service announcement. I am recording this, so just FYI. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
That never.
Yeah, I don't
stopped
know.
me.
Yeah. Not that it stopped anyone.
And I'm not so sure about everything. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. But that's why I think when we start doing it, we'd seen other projects taking that approach. And this was years ago, so I don't know. Like I said, it's just come up more recently as maybe an issue, but I haven't seen anything official come out, so we just keep going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is one of those things where, like, if it works well enough that each individual PMC decides what to do with it, why rock the boat?
I think you meant individual PMC member or
Yeah.
individual PMC. What did you mean?
No, I actually mean PMC. This is not like Nick card, Alexi.
Oh,
Right? Like the foundation's not going to step in and try to dictate how every single person does this. If different projects are served by different
PMC committee, you mean?
That's a Nick
PM
card,
committee.
thank you. Also, congrats on
Nice
fixing your
throwback.
robot voice, Alexi. You did great.
I unplugged and plugged back in the mic. You're welcome.
The age-old solution.
Yeah, that's great. Give it a good swift kick.
I will say one other thing. One of the things we did on all the everything, whether it's PyPy or NuGet or Docker Hub, is we like put some language in there that makes it really clear what is an official release, right? So you might have release candidates, you might have, I don't know, we don't do like nightlies or anything like that. We stay away, like I said, it's always something based on an official build that is repeatable. You could check out that specific 3.46 tag and reproduce that exact artifact that in the same exact way, right? But we definitely put language in there that says, hey, you might use this PyPy thing for convenience. Recognize that if something is marked with, I think we use RC for like release candidate or something that's like something developer testable, that's for developers only. This is not official in any way. So we have like all those kinds of like caveats built into all those things. So hopefully that's kind of enough. It's been enough for a lot of the other binaries we release. Like we have an actual like, Gremlin console and Gremlin sort of like these non-source release things. And we've always been told to put that kind of verbiage in there, and that's made a bit of a difference in how those things were accepted by folks at Apache and stuff. So I don't know, that might be something else to consider if we discuss this further and decide to move forward with it.
So I put a link in the chat about, and I'll put it in the notes, about the latest. This is the Docker official image page with all the potential tags. What you'll see missing is any 4.0, like even the alpha builds are not in this. So yeah, it's the official releases that are non-alpha, non-beta. All right. Okay, so another good way to get the conversation lively. Let's talk about Docker.
Yeah, Patrick, I got one more topic.
Yeah.
So we at DataStax have been exploring the donation of our drivers, and I wanted to get the sense of the group here on, is there interest from the project for taking ownership of those drivers? If so, which ones? And then I'm also interested in your opinion of whether this makes sense to start pursuing now, or whether we should wait until after 4.0 so that we don't distract from the release, really anything, but open to thoughts and opinions.
I don't speak for my colleagues, but I think it would be quite welcome, the open sourcing of the drivers, in particular the Java and the Python driver.
I agree. I think that especially since there's such a tight dependency between the Java driver and the Python driver, I think
sorry.
Or sorry, and the between those two drivers and the, since they're used in the project itself is what I'm trying to say.
Timing wise, I don't think it would distract much from 4.0 stuff because it wouldn't be done by the same people. So I think it can be done in parallel as soon as you guys are ready to do this.
So the issue is the same engineers are getting the drivers 4.0 ready that would be doing because obviously we got to make some changes to the drivers to open source them, and it'll be the same people to do that.
Just to be clear, drivers are already open source. So we're talking
donate
about
them to the Apache Foundation.
Right.
I recommend against that.
I was waiting for that. I just wanted to say thanks again for deciding to add compatibility, by the way, for 4.0 to the 3.0 series. I think that'll be huge. I'm glad we were able to come out of the last meeting that we had where we discussed that with that.
Sounds good. And yeah, we'll follow up on the mailing list with all of this stuff just to make sure that everybody gets a chance to chime in. But so far I'm hearing that, yes, that would be welcome. and then Java and Python are the ones of highest interest.
If they're already open source, though, what are we talking about exactly?
Relicensing.
Moving them from the DataStax repositories to Apache hosted, Apache governed. That's what we're talking about here.
A sub-project of the Cassandra project.
For what purpose, though?
So that more, so that more people can contribute to it without complicated. What the name of that agreement? Contributors agreement, without complicated CLAs. Yes, because I know of at least one organization that was very willing to contribute for a very long time, but was stuck in a legal hell with regards to CLA. Certain anonymous, unnamed organization, but it's much easier to deal with if it's a.
Well, Haddad, I think, also made a great point on the last call. We were talking about this, where there's like an organizational bus factor, where if it's on DataStax's GitHub and it's open source, it's great. But if DataStax, explodes, wipes off the face of the earth, whatever happens, you can't fork things and donate them to the Apache Foundation. So those drivers will forever live outside the Apache ecosystem and never be part of the project itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
significant limitations.
The need for project control drivers, given tight integration with Cassandra itself, has been raised multiple times, and basically the only reason we haven't done it is because we don't have resources, like extra resources, to actually do that ourselves as a project right now. Maybe like in absence of DataStax donating in the future, we would develop an independent one. But if DataStax can donate, I mean, yeah, why waste that effort on reinventing stuff? Yeah, it definitely would be welcome. I don't see how anybody in the community would mind or object it. I seem to remember a certain problem a while ago. Josh, do you remember what it was about?
You'll have to be more specific. My day.
Yeah. It was about It was about open sourcing something, making something official, and then people complaining, having about what exactly they want.
Again, not specific.
LFC doesn't have to.
I think it was drivers related, like a while ago with Hector or some nonsense.
Does it have to do with getting everybody to sign the CLA before it's donated, so that like, because Apache wants
that's why the GoCQL driver adoption failed.
Yeah, so that's my guess is what you're thinking of, is if you can't get permission from every contributor to the source code that is being donated, Apache won't take it.
I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about some developer of some alternative library complaining that this makes something that they aren't working on official. I think it was like Hector related or some mapping library related a while ago. Doesn't matter. Anyway, I don't think right now we have many. I don't think we have a lot of like alternative drivers that have major adoption today. So like there isn't really any competition. So I don't see how any of those developers would object. Yeah, I don't think anybody will object. Basically, I don't see how anybody would.
So I think this raises an issue inside the project that is coming up in multiple places. This came up in the Kubernetes meetings. The project's going to have to rethink how committers are added to the system, because there's just going to be a lot more interesting. There's different things. Like we have a ton of Kubernetes people that do Go programming, and they want to be committers on a Kubernetes operator. And if it's a part of the Apache Cassandra project, then they need to be committers on Apache Cassandra project. Same with a driver. There's going to be driver people.
Yeah, so we did talk about it at some point last year, I think. Basically, what we came up to, I think, as a consensus was, yes, those people should absolutely be added as committers. If it's going to become part of the project, it's contribution to Cassandra. And so long as those people understand that they are kind of limited in scope and like to what they commit to, on a self-awareness basis, we're good. And if people kind of cross the lines of self-awareness, then we can revoke committership status. But I don't foresee this being an issue in practice. I think people tend to be pretty reasonable and understanding, with the
Same
context.
goes both ways, man. If I get out of control and start screwing around with like a, I don't know, Ruby driver, I should be slapped down.
Yeah.
Like standard dev side, like that was part of what we ran into.
I'm not suggesting like establishing a hierarchy of like core, then driver, then Kubernetes or something like that. But basically, you should stick to what you know. And
yeah, I'm not on the PMC or have much of a real say, but it sounds like something that we can start by trusting people and deal with if people cross, because we have this thing called Git with a historical record. On that, I think it would be great to also think about getting people who are community oriented, who aren't necessarily committers, on the PMC. And I know kind of the issue with that before is they had to have a commit bit, and it was kind of this concern about, well, what if they start committing? So if we're trusting people, it'd be great to see kind of like the project management type people that can help us also be added in that regard. Patrick and other folks.
I agree. It is a little bit unfortunate that in the whole ASF hierarchy there is just commuter, PMC member, and like this is basically it. While at the same time we do recognize explicitly in ASF guideline that a contribution is not just code and it's not just documentation either. Like it's stuff like helping people on the user mailing list, for example. But I think the same basic rule applies. Like if we develop guidelines for committers, like not crossing the line, then we could easily add community helping people to committers and to PMCs. If it's the only way to recognize them, like we don't choose the tools we are given. Like these are.
It's kind of like the whole, like, if you have a plastic bag, it shouldn't have to say, don't give this to your child as a toy. Like, if you have the commit bit, like, don't go and do stupid things with it, which is, I think, mostly how people behave. So
right, and if someone who's been elected in the recognition for their efforts in the community, and if they go rogue and start like committing stuff and like being a single reviewer and committing things, I'm just saying if that happens, and we will list this in our guidelines, we will take away their committer bit. But I highly doubt that someone thoughtful enough to invest a lot in helping people on the lists and stuff like that is going to go rogue and start committing to drivers, Kubernetes, and core out of nowhere. So I think we should absolutely write this down in our guidelines, but I don't see us needing it in practice anytime.
Are you going to take point on coming up with those guidelines, Alexi?
I think we had something.
I think the commuter status is interesting, but I think there needs to be people in the PMC that are focused on, like, for instance, I've heard plenty of folks in our current PMC say, I don't know anything about Kubernetes. Well, we should fix that. There's like, hey, we need to make this change based on the operator SDK. There's going to be a whole lot of, I don't know, there'll be crickets on the dev list if we're not careful. And same with drivers. I think there's going to be some specialties that just need to be pulled up into project management.
I mean, you
so
can go
question.
More
sorry, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, you can go more holistically extreme. I need to look into this more, but I heard on the podcast, and I know it must be true, but I think Spark actually has like people in marketing that are committers, if not PMC members, because they market Spark. Like their role is to evangelize that. Like you could take it even further and say you need people that their entire role is to be user advocates that understand what a lot of users are going through and the pain that they face, and that's the voice they bring as a committer or as a PMC member, whether or not they touch code at all. I just think it's kind of a vestigial legacy of the Apache Foundation that being a committer on a project means you have Git access to stomp all over code. But at the end of the day, like, I don't know, I very much err on the side of trust until that trust gets violated and then someone's dead to you and lock it down, to where we could just like leave the whole thing open and let people in and say, just don't do anything stupid. You got the commit flag. You can figure out what stupid is because you're an adult.
Well, and to that point, let's recall that we voted Michael Schuler into the PMC just so he could be a release manager.
True.
It's true.
Yeah. So question actually about like, I think for the drivers and stuff, it's easy. With Kubernetes, I feel like there's this chicken egg thing though, and maybe Josh, what you were just saying kind of fixes this. Like if we leave the doors more open, but historically the doors have been relatively closed to committership, that you need to show some level of experience and, you know, let's say dedication to the project. How does that work with like a totally new piece of code like Kubernetes, where like none of us can even review it, that are, or not even me, but like the existing committers can't review it because to Patrick's point, we have no Kubernetes expertise currently. Like, so how does that chicken egg problem get solved? Do we just sort of say like the 2 or 3 people who are contributing it, like we trust you and here's the bit, and you screw up that trust like Josh said and we take it back? I mean, again, I'm not totally involved in this, not being a committer or PMC member, but I'm curious given how high I know the bar is, like say for myself in core. Right.
I would trust them to work on the operator way before I trust myself.
Agree.
And I would trust myself on the database way before I trust them. So it's just kind of a, like if we're opening up, if we're widening the aperture of what we consider part of the Cassandra ecosystem in the Apache Foundation inside the repo with subprojects and other things, we're going to start getting more diverse voices into the governance of the project, which, you know, is probably a good thing. But
And I'm all for widening the aperture, but I just want to point out that unringing the commit bell is very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's where the whole
PMC.
code,
Yeah.
no asshole rule, all that.
No, it's not that simple.
Is there a concept, and I know in a lot of open source foundations, there is a concept of sub-projects being kind of their own entity. Like a subcommittee PMC.
I haven't heard of anything like that, but
well, it's a thing in CNCF. I was just in a TOC meeting this morning, and they're talking about spinning off the SIGs, and they're their own management committees.
Are those mutex, or is there like Venn diagram overlaps there?
A lot of Venn diagram overlap.
I don't think so.
I don't know. Honestly, like I think
if
someone
they operate independently.
In my opinion, if someone gets to that level, like I think we talked about this before, and it's basically, do I trust this person? That's what gets a +1 from me. Do I think that they're going to work well with other people? Do they write quality code? If they're doing it in Kubernetes at first and then they drift over to Cassandra, they're probably, if I trust them, they're going to start, you know, and they're worthy of the trust, then they're probably going to start with bug fixes and low-hanging fruit things. Someone's not going to come in and go, hey, like I can commit to the Ruby driver, so I'm just going to start like, I'm going to rewrite the storage engine. Like it just seems like so far-fetched that it's like, you know, it may be worth saying we'll deal with it if it happens, because it's so unlikely to happen.
I believe in Hanlon's razor.
Which razor is this one?
John has no razors.
Never mistake for malice for which stupidity will suffice. Like if anyone makes a mistake, that's okay. I don't think anyone's going to be malicious.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that if it ever was a thing, it's like, it's a conversation. It's not like a ban hammer.
The commit
it's
thing
like,
we
hey,
can fix pretty.
Just
pretty
take it easy on the commits.
Yeah. The commit thing can be fixed pretty easily. It's where the governance comes in that gets a little confusing to me, because it's like, I don't think that being on the PMC, I would really have a good idea of what good governance of a Kubernetes operator for Cassandra looks like without educating myself. Right? Governance over the drivers, like I have written some shitty driver code in my time, and that's as far as my relationship with them has gone. So there is a piece of this that we'll probably need to hash out and figure out, what does it look like for a PMC that has historically been about the core of the database only, to kind of broaden a little bit in terms of the domain of that governance.
So if there are other communities doing this already, I mean, is it worth, you know, reaching out to some of them? Like we've spoke to the Hadoop community before. I'm sure the Spark community is accessible. I try to figure out what they're doing, and I guess like the last thing I'd ask is like, this problem has to affect like all modern Apache projects, like people with Apache experience here. Like, is there any avenue to?
Nate had some examples, Jordan, and actually he had several. He was in the Kubernetes meeting, and he's like, "Oh, here's like 3 projects that do 3 different things similar." So,
okay, so I mean, I would say let's start with that, and otherwise, like, it seems like something that, you know, we need to start butting up against the ASF with. But if other people are doing this, we should be able to.
I think one of them was Apache Commons.
I've been fascinated by how when there's a kind of a smaller project that's been consumed into Tinkerpop, usually it's kind of a driver type thing. And I'm always thinking this person will clearly make the jump to start digging into core and start learning about that and start contributing there. And they just never do. Like the thing they brought in was the thing they stuck with, and it just never drifted out of that.
Are you talking about the GLVs there in that example?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, for the most part. Like, it's just no one ever really makes the jump out of that for whatever reason. At least I haven't really seen that yet. But it's just kind of interesting because there's like this concern that, oh, there's somebody coming in who doesn't necessarily know a lot about the core of the system, and they'll start getting into things, and they never quite do. Unfortunately, in some ways, like, you kind of want certain folks, once you realize how good they are at what they're doing, to like branch out a little bit and maybe do some good work somewhere else. It never quite happens. So
I always suspected it was just containment by language expertise on that sort of thing.
Yeah. Anyway, just kind of interesting. Even I guess even like some Docker development stuff like that. Like I just thought folks were like, because I didn't know anything about Docker until it kind of came in, and once it did, it was just like, oh, okay, well, now I have to vote on whether or not this Docker thing goes out, and I have no idea how any of it works, and I just have to kind of sit back and just kind of trust the people that trust the people who are managing it and dealing with it, and so far that's worked pretty well, and now I kind of at least have a handle on it. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how that's developed. Just quick point, in case folks didn't see it in the chat, I did post like the latest distribution guidelines that are being bandied around in Incubator, around like Docker and all those different third-party platforms. So just something to take a look at. It's nothing official. I've been waiting for that page to become official before I worry about it and change anything. So anyway, something to look at.
I also posted a thing from the official ASF guide, and interestingly enough, that you can treat a sub-project like a project. Just something to read. All right, well, kind of coming up on the hour here. And David and Jeff, sorry for the late notice. We had a pretty lively discussion. I'm gonna go back and rewatch this recording so I can finish up the notes and get those posted right. It's so hard doing. I can't walk and chew gum either. But, that's okay. Fun to hang out with sometimes. But we had a pretty good conversation. I think some of the things that came out of this were trying to sort out the sub-project stuff, which is really, I think this is a good time to talk about it with drivers and Kubernetes and even Sidecar. We have a lot of sub-projects that are popping up. And then Josh, you had another thing that you were going to be taking up to the PMC. What was that?
Official Docker releases. So when we release, rolling that up with it.
Got it. Right, official Docker release. Okay, cool. All right, does anybody have anything else to bring up?
Next time, Patrick, I'd appreciate it if we both wore deeper V's.
I haven't. I'll work on that. Yeah.
It just didn't feel, this meeting didn't feel right.
I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, John. That would be really bad. All right. Yeah. It's all about being inclusive. All right, cool. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thanks, everybody.